Sounds like this would be a good time then to take my phone and put it on silent. I kind of missed the Mary Pat announcement at the beginning of the meeting.
What was that?
It was a special reminder to please take your cell phone and put it on silent or vibrate, because she would make a, oh, and there's the bell.
There's the bell. Good morning. The March 31st, 2021 meeting of the Board of Estimates is now called to order. In the interest of promoting health and safety as we continue to deal with COVID-19 pandemic, the Board of Estimates will continue to meet virtually. At this time, I would ask Mr. Comptroller Bill Henry for any corrections, additions, and noted abstentions from today's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are no changes and corrections to today's agenda. There are no protests for today's meeting. The following items are being deferred or withdrawn. On page 11, item number 4, Health Department Agreement with Behavioral Health System Baltimore is being deferred from today until April 7th. On pages 58 and 59, item number 5, Bureau of Procurement B50004094, providing temporary administrative personnel services, is being withdrawn. On page 59, item number 6, Bureau of Procurement B50004505, periodic maintenance of operable walls, is being deferred from today until April 7th. The following items are being moved to the non-routine agenda. On pages 2 and 3, Department of Law General Release. On pages 4 and 5, Department of Law Settlement Agreement and Release. On page 10, item number 1, Health Department Agreement with Baltimore Medical System Incorporated. On page 10, item number 3, Health Department Agreement with the Family Tree Incorporated. On pages 11 and 12, items number 6, Health Department Agreement with Total Healthcare Incorporated. Pages 29 and 30, Department of Recreation and Parks Task Assignment number 8 with Rummel, Klepper and Call LLP and transfer of funds. On pages 35 to 36, Extra Work Order number 2, Department of Public Works, Office of Engineering and Construction, SC 965, improvements to the sanitary sewers in the northeast area of Baltimore City. The following items are being moved to the routine agenda. On page 14, Police Department Grant Award. And on page 60, item number 7, Bureau of Procurement, contract number 08000, Celebrate Ultimate Software and Hardware Upgrade. Under abstentions, the Honorable President Nick Mosby is abstaining on page 37. Item number 1, Office of the State's Attorney for Baltimore City, retroactive travel approval reimbursement. There are no abstentions for the Honorable Mayor Brandon Scott, Honorable City Solicitor Jim Shea, Acting Director of Public Works Matthew Garbark, or myself. Those are all the changes to today's agenda, Mr. President.
No, thank you, Mr. Comptroller. I now direct the board's attention to the memorandum from my office dated March 29th, 2021, identifying matters to be considered as routine agenda items, together with any corrections and additions that have been noted by our amazing comptroller. I will entertain a motion to approve all items contained on the routine agenda today.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The routine agenda has been adopted. Now on to the non-routine agenda. The first item of the agenda today can be found on pages 2 through 3, Department of Law General Release. We have Mr. Kurt Heinrich from the Law Department, along with representatives from the Department of Public Works to speak on this item. Mr. Heinrich, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Board of Estimates. This item is in reference to a settlement for a sewer backup that occurred on October the 12th of 2018. It was in the 1000 block of East 30th Street, I believe. It was to a building that was owned by Trison Construction. This was a lawsuit that was brought by the building owner's insurance company for the damages, the cleanup, the repair, the lost personal property, desks, chairs, office equipment, things of that nature. This this claim was initially denied because at the time we did not have all of the information, and quite frankly, the insurance company, when they filed the claim, had the wrong information as well. So that's one of the reasons why it's taken such a long time to get to this point for a resolution. But in any event, the reason that the claim has been accepted is because the sewer backup was the result of a part of a collapse in the sanitary sewer main that was scheduled for repair. Unfortunately, the repair did not occur until about 10 days to 2 weeks after the sewer backup had occurred. The city was aware of this particular defect in the sanitary main years prior, and in fact, it was scheduled to be repaired under a different sanitary contract. Unfortunately, that never occurred, and it was then put on to another sanitary contract, SC 976, for repairs. And again, the repairs unfortunately did not occur until a week or two after this incident happened. I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Heinrich. At this point, are there any questions from members of the board? Mr. Comptroller, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to follow up on some information that had been provided to my office. This damage occurred because of repairs to a sewer line that had been scheduled to occur several years ago, but the work was never done. Would someone from the law department or from DPW be able to explain to the board members how exactly it happened that the work was not done? And if DPW's contractor didn't do the job they were supposed to years ago, is there now any legal recourse against the contractor for making us whole for this settlement?
Mr. Comptroller, I would defer to the Department of Public Works for any explanation as to why the initial repair did not occur under the prior contract.
Good morning, Mr. Council President and Honorable Board of Estimates. My name is Carlos Stevenson. I'm Engineer 2 for the Bureau of Water and Wastewater under DPW. To answer your question, there were several, under the first segment of the first phase of the consent decree, there were several projects that encountered issues where the city had issues with the contractor. The belief was that there were some utility conflicts and other matters associated with it. It was decided that some of these elements needed to be de-scoped. They were de-scoped and repackaged into later projects so that they could be addressed accurately.
Wait, are you saying that the work was removed from the earlier contract?
Correct. There were. I'm sorry.
I'm checking with Mr. Heinrich. Is that consistent with the information you were given? Because that is not what I had been told previously by DPW. Previously, I had been told by DPW that they did realize that the work was supposed to have been done, and that's why they moved the contract. I'm sorry, they moved the work to a different contract. But I had not previously been told that DPW purposely moved that work out of the previous contract, 829, and into 976.
If I didn't say it correctly, there were numerous issues with the contractor, which impeded our ability to get our work completed in a timely fashion. Hence the reason that project was halted and the work was moved to 976.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So, but somebody, and I guess maybe I should stop saying somebody and ask, who was the contractor in 829 who was originally supposed to do the work, the lack of which resulted in the sewer backup?
It was in situ form.
I'm sorry, say again?
In situ form was the contractor.
I'm sorry, I'm getting a bad connection. Let me try one last time, and then I'll just ask to get it in writing later. But it has did the city ever tell that contractor, you know what, that's okay, it's all right that you didn't do this work, we're just going to move it into a later contract, we're formally changing the scope of 829 so that this work isn't part of it? Did we ever do that?
The work was reassigned, yes, because of the contractor's inability to get the work done.
Okay.
Following that taking place, there were some penalties associated that went to the contractor because of their inability to get this work done.
Okay, so I guess my question would be, and this one now really can be either for law or for DPW. Does the way we structure our contracts allow us in a situation like that to also pursue the contractor for the cost of a settlement like this?
Mr. Comptroller, I believe that those kind of issues with the construction contractors in terms of not being able to perform all of the different elements in a timely manner, I believe that those aspects are dealt with with the bonds, performance bonds that the city holds, and the ability to assess liquidated damages for failure to do that. But in terms of this type of settlement, the answer would be no.
Okay. Okay, so we can't, we got whatever we could get back at the time. And there's no way to now go back and also say, and on top of the fact that you didn't do the work that we asked you to do, you've ended up costing us 40, sorry, is it 40? 40,000. You've ended up costing us $40,000 that we have to pay to Triton's insurance company because of all the damage that was done to them because of the sewer backup. We can't go back now and also try to get that out of the contractor or their bond.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. I guess the only other question I would ask is how long ago was this that we realized this work wasn't actually done and needed to be reassigned to a future contract?
During the discovery process is when in order for us to, again, respond to discovery questions as a result of this lawsuit, we had to do further digging, and that's how we learned of this additional information. In all honesty,
no, sorry, Mr. Heinrich. That's when the law department learned of it.
Oh, okay.
I'm asking, when did DPW realize that the previous contractor hadn't done the work such that they penalized them and decided to reassign the work to a later contract? How long ago was that?
I'm sorry. That was I would say it was a 2-year exercise as far as from the time that the 829 contract ended to the time that 976 began.
Okay, so, and when did 976 begin?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information in front of me right now. I apologize.
Okay, the reason I'm asking is, if all of this happened, well, not all of this, but if the actual sewer backup was in October of 2018. That means 976 was in process back in the fall of 2018. And so that means that 829 ended more than 2 years before this. So we knew back in 2016 or 2015 that this work needed to be done, and we had scheduled it to be done. It didn't get done, so we put it off for 2 years, and it ended up being 11 days too late to avoid the problem that now we're paying $40,000 for. What has changed in DPW's processes since then to keep this kind of thing from happening again?
Well, and the reason that the length of time before I directly answer that question, the reason that it took so long is that we repackaged the original work included in SC 976, which had to be advertised and had to go through the bid process. So, and then after it was awarded, it did also it had to be scheduled in line with the contractor schedule. So hence the reason that the length of time went so long. But we have put, as far as I'm sorry, as far as we have put measures in place to ensure that we have accurate reporting. We instituted asset tracking sheets for each project, which are updated on a daily basis by our inspection staff. We've instituted what we call project performance indicators, which is a monthly tool that we utilize to track the performance on each of the projects as it relates to whether it be as-built, asset tracking, IDRs, I'm sorry, I'm using an acronym, inspector daily reports, daily construction logs, and things of that nature. Also, at the time that 829 was going on and the earlier projects were going on, our document management system was just in its infancy. It has now progressed and migrated, so that a lot of the information that we are gathering is a lot more accurate now that we have our document management system running.
Okay, well, first of all, Mr. Stevenson, thank you very much for doing the acronym catch. Because I am still learning all of the different acronyms that DPW seems to love to work with. Okay, I think that's all I have right now, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. And Mr. Stevenson, just to get at the heart of where Comptroller's Henry's questions were directed, on a scale of urgency, we know that our infrastructure is the oldest in the state, some of the oldest runs in the entire country. In this particular segment, I assume that there's dozens, if not tens and tens of other runs that you guys have to balance on if it's going in this particular job or it's going to happen this particular year to kind of balance out the work. I'm wondering if this particular work and this particular run kind of falls into that category. I see Mr. Director Garbark with his hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. And I think that gets to one of the larger issues here is, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not just dozens. In fact, it's more likely hundreds.
I didn't want you to say I was exaggerating.
Yeah. And this is the main focus of the second phase of the modified consent decree. So what we do is there are so many areas that do need this work that they end up being put on a list. And if it's not, there are areas where there is a clear issue that is causing problems right now that ends up sort of taking that triage to get it done quicker and faster. So that's why sometimes these things are rescheduled and put into different categories based on the needs in the ground, and also what's happening right now in terms of potential backups or sinkholes or something like that. But the focus of the second phase of the consent decree is going to be mostly focused on this type of work. So that's the main focus of this. And we're going to have most of our contracts are going to be focused just on that work. And we have, as Mr. Stevenson indicated, a very rigorous inspection schedule that has been put in place since the time this happened, as well as asset tagging and geocoding for asset management. So we know exactly what's in the ground.
Thank you, Director Garbark. And yeah, again, it just speaks to the heart of where we are as a city. And I know that unfortunately, a lot of cans were kicked down the road, and DPW is here to try to fix and correct. That's why we have the consent decree in place. But I thought it was important for us to really take a step back and just understand the complexity of trying to manage and juggle the level of urgencies throughout the hundreds and hundreds of runs that we have issues with. Mr. Stevenson, as always, thank you for coming so well prepared and providing us a wealth of knowledge and information on this particular item. At this point, are there any additional questions for the board, for the law department, or for DPW? Hearing and seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to proceed.
I move approval of the settlement agreement as recommended by the law department.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is approved. Next up, we will stay with the law department on non-routine agenda today on pages 4 and 5. This is another settle agreement and release. Once again, we have Mr. Kurt Heinrich from the law department, along with representatives from the Baltimore City Police Department to speak on the item. Mr. Heinrich, the floor is yours.
And actually, Mr. President, I'm going to turn this over to Lisa Walden, who is the chief of the legal affairs section, and then outside counsel, Mr. Chaz Ball is here as well.
Thank you so much. Ms. Walden, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Ball was attorney for this case and negotiated the settlement. So I think it's appropriate to let him describe the reasons for the settlement and why we think it's in the best interest of the city. And if there's any questions here, I can answer. Of course, we'd be glad to.
Thank you, Ms. Walden. Attorney Ball, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, members of the Board of Estimates. This is a matter in which it actually happened in 2016. Officers were called out to the scene of a gas station where there were some, sorry about that. There were some minors that were, or juveniles that were in the area. I think there were some allegations of them using marijuana becoming sort of an issue. The owner of the establishment called out the police to the scene to sort of stop them from what they were doing. The officers that were initially called out were not any of the officers that were defendants in the matter. When the officers arrived, the juveniles were held, detained to be identified and to be released to their parents. But a lot of people in the area started to come towards and sort of converge towards the gas station where the juveniles were being detained. One of the individuals who arrived at the scene was Miss Rouse, the plaintiff in the case. The signal 13 was dropped. Other officers arrived at the scene, and Miss Rouse, as she approached, started to indicate that one of the juveniles who was in custody was her grandson. It turned out that the individual that was in custody at that point was not her grandson. His mother was called and said, "No, she's not the grandmother. Don't release him to her." Ms. Rouse left the scene, and then shortly thereafter was advised that her grandson was being detained, and she returned back to the scene. When she returned back to the scene, officers told her that she couldn't approach, that she had to stay where she was. She was upset. She was yelling. She was cursing. And this last part of it was actually on video. As she approaches, when the officer tries to stop her from approaching and sort of pushes her away, she continues forward. There was a dispute as to whether the officer went to arrest her or pushed her back again. But ultimately, Miss Rouse was taken to the ground. There's a tape of the incident, which is frankly, evocative. It's something that potentially a jury could award money for Miss Rouse. And after she was taken to the ground, she was handcuffed. She alleges that she suffered some injury in the course of being handcuffed, and then taken to a patrol car where they couldn't get her inside. And then she was actually set on the curb. This matter, one of the reasons for the amount of the settlement is because it's a matter in federal court. And in federal court, there's the ability to get attorney's fees, meaning that not only, typically in state court cases, there's some contingency agreement that exists. In federal court under 1983 cases, attorney's fees can be awarded after a jury verdict. So the jury would award whatever verdict, and then instead of, or in addition to whatever contingency fee, the court would create, whatever would be the amount of attorney's fees based on the attorney's experience as a whole process to find the award of the fees. This is because it's a federal case and because of COVID, this case is old. This case has been going on for some period of time. The incident happened in 2016, and frankly, we likely wouldn't get trial until 2022. So that's even more in terms of attorney's fees that could come over that period of time. In addition to that, one of the officers in the case, and maybe one of the most important officers, may have difficulties, without getting into too much information about it, my understanding is that there's health concerns that he might not be able to testify in the ultimate trial, and that becomes an important aspect. Let me be clear that there was a motion for summary judgment that was filed in the case. The arrest was found by the federal court to have been lawful, and with probable cause. The only remaining claim is to the use of excessive force under 1983 and to the failure to intervene as to the two other officers.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns from the board? Mr. Comptroller, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Ball, there was, and actually maybe this one would be more appropriate for Ms. Walden. The one question I had about this was whether the officer who was accused of using excessive force was disciplined or subject to any accountability after the incident.
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that. So my understanding is that this incident was the subject of an internal affairs investigation, so it was thoroughly investigated. My understanding is that the officer was exonerated, and that were Mr. Ball to have taken this case to trial, one of the evidentiary issues he would not have faced would have been that this officer had some sort of extensive history of similar types of complaints.
Okay, so this officer did not have a prior history of anything
That would
like...
not have been a challenge with this witness, no.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Are there any additional questions or concerns from the board? Hearing and seeing none at this point, I'll entertain a motion to proceed.
I move approval of the item, the settlement agreement as recommended by the law department.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is approved. On to the next non-routine agenda item of the day, can be found on pages 10 through 12, Health Department agreements. Without objection, I would like to consider the three agreements on the non-routine agenda as a single item. Hearing and seeing none, we will proceed and consider these items together. I guess, once again, in the interest of transparency, Mr. Comptroller, we're trying to work to try to figure out, how we can, provide information just on the agenda that kind of communicates that these health-related grants that external partners go out to the federal and state government and secure, and the cities just acting as a fiduciary partner or entity of which pass through that the money comes through from the federal government or state to that particular entity, that MBE, WBE goals do not apply. Again, it's concerning the way that the routine agenda still reads that without communicating that fact. And just wondering, Mr. Comptroller, can this be the last week that we see it this way? Is there any help that you kind of need from my office, or, how can we move forward with this? I love talking to Ms. Thompson and Chief Miller every week about this, just to confirm. But I think in the interest of time and efficiency, we could just do this on the routine agenda.
Sorry, the only question I have, Mr. President, is do we need this disclaimer on each individual item for
No,
which it is true,
yeah,
or could
I
we
think if we
put some
format
type
it,
of,
yeah, I think if we format it in a way, we just create that one section and the items in that section fall under that one disclaimer.
okay, so I'm gonna ask my staff to actually, who would it be? I guess it would probably be best if they worked with Embu to make sure that we word the statement exactly right.
Yep.
And then, so I'm seeing Chief Miller on here. Chief Miller, if you could provide my office with just a 1 or 2 sentence disclaimer that would appropriately how best to say this, that would appropriately address the council president's concerns, then what we will do is we will make sure that we add that statement into the agenda at the beginning of the set of agreements, anytime there are such agreements on the board. Does that work for you?
Yeah, excuse me. Yes. Good morning, Council President, Comptroller Henry, Mayor Scott, and members of the board. And yes, we can provide that statement for this reason.
And I believe there's already a statement somewhere out there, but I know Chief Miller, between you and Ms. Thompson, you guys will get it done. I guess for the interest of this particular item, thank you, Mr. Comptroller, for agreeing to do that, and thank you, Chief Miller, for working with him. For the interest of this particular item, I guess either Ms. Thompson or Chief Miller, if you guys could speak to the fact that these items from pages 10 through 12 are exactly what we're saying. They're just pass-through items that MBE, WBE goals do not apply.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, Mr. President, and members of the board. I can accurately say that is correct.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Hopefully this will be the last week that you have to come on and confirm that for me.
Thank you.
No, thank you. At this time, are there any questions or concerns from the board regarding this item? Hearing and seeing none, at this point, I'll entertain a motion.
So move.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. And the ayes have it. This item is approved. Just for the general public, ensuring that you guys are up to speed on exactly what just took place. On the routine agenda of the Board of Estimates, when you read this particular line item or these line items, again, the city acts as a pass-through for external organizations that go out and secure grants from the federal government and the state government. And it just reads that MBE, WBE goals have been waived, meaning that there is no MBE or WBE goals. In the interest of continuing to grow small minority women-owned businesses in our city, this board has taken the bull by the horn and ensuring that we are literally digging through contracts that were done in the past. We're digging through extensions that were done in the past to ensure that the equitable amount of participation is here in the city of Baltimore. And we want to ensure that from a transparent perspective, the general public understands and knows that these particular line items do not apply based off of all the information I just provided prior. So that is exactly what we're going to do. The comptroller has agreed to ensure that we put the right language around these particular line items. That way we don't have to pull them off of non-routine. And as a general public, when you decide to fumble through the 100 pages on the agenda, you'll know exactly what those line items are doing and why they do not apply to MBE, WBE goals. With that said, on to the next item of the day.
Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. Comptroller.
Just one last little update for Chief Miller. Apparently, Ms. Ella in the law department is already putting together this language.
Perfect.
So so if you wanted to work with her, that might be even faster.
How efficient that was. Thank you, Mr. Comptroller, for that update. Next on to our next item, a non-routine, can be found on pages 14, Baltimore City Police Department Grant Award. We have representatives from BPD here to speak on this item. I would like to recognize Baltimore Police Department at this time. Is anyone on from the police department here to speak about the grant award on page 14? The 9.18 million?
Mr. President, I
Yes.
think that was moved to non-routine as the controller started.
Is that right, Mr. Comptroller? I told you, you got to keep me honest, Mr. Comptroller, with your housekeeping notes. Is it, this is page 14. It's the $9.18 million BPD support from GoCat.
Yeah, this, okay,
You moved it back to routine?
we did move that back to routine.
Thank
I'm
you,
sorry,
Mr.
I was still catching up on making sure that we're getting your waiver language.
Not mine, it's
in there
our. You meant our waiver language, not my waiver language. Well, thank
But yes, the solicitor is correct. We moved the grant award back to the routine agenda.
Mr. Solicitor, thank you for catching that for us.
Well, I had to earn my pay today.
Okay, on to the next item. It can be found on pages 29 through 30 of the agenda, Department of Recreation and Parks Task Assignment. This item relates to design and bid work for Riverside Park Athletic Fields. At this time, I would like to recognize representatives from Rexon Park to speak on this item. Is Mr. Borman or someone from Rexon Park on? Is anyone on from Rexon Park? This is an item that at this point we'll just defer to next week to ensure that Rexon Park has the ability to come on and speaking to us about Riverside Park Athletic Fields.
Mr. President, we'll
Should-
try to
should-
get some. We'll try to get somebody on really quickly.
Okay, yeah. So what we'll do with Mr. Mayor, we'll just delay this and put this in the back. There's not much to get through, and if we get someone on, great. If not, we'll just take it up next week. Next item on non-routine can be found on pages 34 through 36 of the agenda, extra work order. This is a request for a 12-month time extension for Anchor Construction Corporation to make improvements to sanitary sewers in northeast parts of Baltimore City. At this time, I'd like to recognize representatives from DPW to speak on this item.
Good morning, once again, Honorable Board of Estimates. My name is Carlos Stevenson, Engineer 2 in the Bureau of Water and Wastewater under the Department of Public Works. SC 965, as you stated, is a part of the consent decree program that involves cleaning and lining and multiple other rehab methods as far as for sanitary sewer lines and manholes. The reason for this request is that upon proceeding with this work, we found that a lot of the assets that were identified for the SC 965 have been completed by other previous projects. To date, we've only utilized 17%. Based on our monthly status report, we've only utilized 17% of the total contract. Being that we identified that a lot of the assets had been done previously, we found that this may be a great opportunity to be proactive as an agency and as a city, and start looking at adding additional assets from our phase 2 part of the consent decree. Director Garbar spoke earlier in reference to some of those activities and the need to try to address some of those more urgent assets associated with it. And we are requesting approval of this 12-month time extension based on that information.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. The original contract, what was the MBE-WBE goals?
The original MBE-WBE goals for this particular contract, the MBE was 18% and the WBE goals were 16%.
And out of the 17% of the original that was already spent, how much MBE-WBE has been obtained to date?
Based on our monthly status reports, we have 3% MBE participation and 5% WB participation.
So the contract award, as it relates to the current run rate, has significantly fell under what the actual goal of for MBE as well as WBE, correct?
Yes, sir.
Again, we constantly go through this when we talk about extra work orders and we talk about extensions. I do have a concern where we're in the midst of starting out a project and we're falling so far behind as it relates to keeping up with the goals in the contractor. When we talk about this extension, is there a plan in place with the contractor to ensure that the contractor is meeting the goals required throughout the project, as opposed to us fumbling at the end and trying to figure out how we can how they can make the goals?
If I may, before I directly answer that question, on most contracts, the utilization is kind of a bell curve in the utilization of it. A lot of our MBWB participants do more dig work or manholes or restoration. So a lot of our MBs and WBs definitely do restoration, whether it be roadway, sidewalk, tree, and so forth. So hence the reason that the utilization, being that we found that a lot of assets were completed based on our CCTV information that was done during the contract, we didn't really engage those elements because we didn't have to perform a lot of the work. But to go back and answer your question, yes, there is a plan in place for the utilization of these assets.
So, Mr. Stevenson, I'm so glad you brought that point up as it relates to that bell curve associated with the utilization, or inverse bell curve as it relates to the utilization regarding MBE and WBE. I think that where we are and where we're trying to move forward is not only having diversity as it relates to participation in this project, but also when you disaggregate it, diversity as it relates to the types of tasks that are being done by MBEs and WBEs. And ensuring that the city's doing all that we can do to not just prop up the folks that are doing the digging and doing the other type of manual jobs at the beginning or at the end of these projects, but also the professional services throughout the projects as well. And I think every time that we have the ability of looking at and unpackaging a contract like this, it's important for us to make that a main sticking point because there are minority women owned firms in and around the city that can do much more than some of the work that is kind of stymied off as it relates to some of these projects for contractors to make their goals. And, this is something that I'm committed to consistently working on to ensuring that, again, not just from a manual and labor perspective on these contracts, but also from a professional services side, that some of the minority business enterprises and women business enterprises and small businesses here in the city of Baltimore have the opportunity to participate in work like that. That is the only way that they can grow from the current state that they're in to potentially being a prime one day in the future. So I appreciate you hitting the nail on the head. I think we kind of understand and know that is a major problem and has been a major problem in the city of Baltimore. I look forward to working with the administration as well as members of this board. So in a couple of years, we can start talking about how we're increasing opportunities for women and minority-owned businesses and things other than what the standard work kind of applies.
Yes, sir.
So the only other question I have, Mr. Director, I see your hand raised, Mr. Director Barber.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I just wanted to clarify something with Mr. Stevenson very quickly. The percentage for MBE and WBE you mentioned, that is pertaining to the entire $12 million contract, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and only 1.258 of that entire $12 million contract has been awarded and paid so far, right? So the percentages would be a lot higher for what was actually paid.
Correct, sir.
Okay.
So what are the percentages, Director Garber?
I'm sorry?
What are the percentages?
Do you have those percentages of what was actually, Mr. Stevenson, paid for the MBE and WBE of the 1.25?
I'm sorry, I do not have that at this time. I can-
Okay, that's fine. I think that we all can agree, and I think you said it best, Mr. Stevenson, you called it a bell curve. I call it an inverse bell curve. We see significant amount of work in the beginning and staging and like setting up, and then we see it also at the end. We want it to be somewhat more flat line. Eventually, that would be the ultimate goal, to ensure that all types of business opportunities, particularly on the professional services, are provided through some of these contracts. How that is not going to ever be a perfect flat line, I think that is, I guess, the motivation of where my questioning and my concern comes from. The only other question I have is, as it relates to the plan that was put in place, Mr. Stevenson, do you have any specifics about the plan or any updates on that?
Actually, I don't have any specifics that I could share at this point in time, but I can say that we've identified assets that we know that a lot of our subcontractors will be utilized to get done. As this project is constructed, Anchor Construction itself is more of a lining contractor. So all of the other ancillary work, whether it be manhole rehabilitation, whether it be point repairs, and other ancillary work, cleaning and lining and cleaning, are going to be done by subcontractors. As far as the cured in place CIPP lining, that will primarily be done by Anchor Construction, which is a highly specialized form of rehabilitation. But most of the other work will be performed by the subcontractors.
Again, as always, thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Director Garbart?
Yeah, I just want to just make clear that what we're doing with this, or the plan for this, is to actually put pieces of relining and improvement in the contract. Doing that will bring us into compliance, because we found that a lot of areas had already been relined and repaired. That is, as you mentioned, Mr. President, earlier, goes with the age and the state of our infrastructure. We have 1,500 miles of sanitary sewer lines that are over 100 years old. So sometimes we don't know what the condition is and what people have done on it until we actually get in there. So we have plenty of these that we're being able to move into the queue, and move these pieces into the queue are going to help us get to that compliance, because that work is all sort of set out there, and all we have to do is just have those pieces and those projects there, and we'll obtain compliance.
Taking on deferred maintenance. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns from the board? I see your hand raised, Mr. Comptroller.
Yes, thank you. I've actually considered talking to DPW about whether they should just have a separate Bureau of Deferred Maintenance to address the multitude of infrastructure issues.
Mr. Comptroller, I think that spans well beyond DPW.
That's fair. It might be something we need to put under the city administrator. The one question I had was, I understand that this contract is for work required under the consent decree, or maybe I should say a consent decree, with MDE, similar to contract SC 910, where we approved an extra work order last week. Since this issue came up then also, can DPW tell the board whether the prime contractor is expecting to seek an MBEWB waiver at the end of the contract term?
As far as current usage, or as far as our plan on moving forward with this, there hasn't been any discussions about seeking a waiver at this time.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns for this particular item? Hearing and seeing none, at this point, I'll entertain a motion to proceed.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is approved. We're going to move back to the item from Recs and Parks. I think we have Mr. Borman on the call. So the next item that we're going to hear from non-routine agenda can be found on pages 29 through 30 of the agenda. The Department of Recreation and Parks task assignment. This item relates to the design and bid work for Riverside Park Athletic Fields. At this time, I'd like to recognize Mr. Borman from Rex and Parks to speak on behalf of this project.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Adam Borman, Chief of Capital Development for Baltimore City Rec and Parks. This task is basically to finalize a project that is roughly at 90% design. This will include preparation of the written specifications, the final cost estimate, and some final tweaks to stormwater management comments. The reason that the goals are a little short here is because there simply isn't much work left for the sub-consultants to perform. The bulk of this is coordination and review by the prime RK&K engineering. For additional context, I want to mention that the first 90% of design was under a previous task number 32, in which that task achieved an MBE goal of 32.96 and a WB of 25.5. So with that understood, we were well above the goals in that one and are just finishing up the project with this final smaller task.
Thank you, Mr. Borman. Ms. Comptroller, do you have any questions regarding this particular item?
I continue to be a little confused over whether goals are for an entire project or are also per task. So if the 28% MBE goal, the goal for the overall contract or the goal for task number 8?
The contract.
Right,
Yes.
okay. So
that was the utilization discussion we just had with DPW. Right. Sometimes they front load and back load some of the manual labor. And we want to see a more smooth process where some of the professional services are brought to play as it relates to MBE, WBEs as well.
So if we have right now an attainment of 18.36% on a goal of 28%, I don't know that it is any particular cause for celebration to say that in a previous task it was higher than the goal if that previous task has assumably been factored into the current total attainment and the current total attainment is still this low. So I think the bigger question is, what is the plan for the remaining tasks to ensure that the amount of attainment, frankly, skyrockets compared to what it has been today in order to get to the total goal by the end of the task. Like how much total money is remaining in the overall contract?
Well, we are in about month 6 of the 36-month contract, so we have plenty of time to address all that. I could probably pull up where we're at in terms of the monies, but we certainly understand the concern, and we're working with our consultants to make sure this is a priority. We intend to get with the MBU office and really just have a heart-to-heart on how we can work together and find more opportunities to not only meet but exceed these goals. So,
Mr. Borman, for the record, who is the vendor that we're using here?
The vendor is RK&K Engineering, a locally based firm.
Yeah, understood.
Mr. President, I'm wondering if maybe what we are really seeking is a conversation about how tasks are assigned, and this would be across agencies. Is there some way to maybe either if it's not a question of can what goes into a task be grouped differently, maybe we could bring multiple tasks in for approval at one time that would show the balance that we're trying to achieve in getting the MBE and WBE participation. Because I think I understand the concern coming from the agencies, which is, the way that the primes are putting together programs with their subs means that there are parts of the overall contract where they're going to have MBE and WBA participation, but then there are parts where they're just not going to. And that's when we're going to see this kind of fluctuation. And I'm wondering if it's possible to maybe be, well, can you group a task that has high MBE, WBA attainment with a task that has low one, so that what comes to the board doesn't look so roller coaster-ish?
Well, we can talk offline, Mr. Comptroller.
Yeah.
I guess I'm trying to go down a different path where the non-traditional tasks that we do a better job as a city of identifying small minority women-owned companies that can kind of perform those tasks at an efficient and effective level for these types of projects. I think conflating tasks that are traditional MBE, WBE tasks with tasks that aren't, just for the balancing out of the numbers, is kind of
Perpetuates. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. So I just think that, we have to be more vigilant, and it has to be something that we have to be dedicated to in ensuring, because again, it's the companies that are growing or attempting to grow in the tasks that are non-traditional, that these primes never think about, that are kind of stifled, and they can never become primes. And typically you see that in professional services. I think it's something that we have to constantly work on, and something that we'll continue to talk about. Mr. Mayor, I see your hand raised.
No, thank you, Mr. President and Mr. Comptroller. I think that this, again, for us is important and will be an important part as we work through the procurement reform, so that we're building contracts in a process that allow, Mr. President, exactly for what we all want, for our local small and minority women-owned businesses to actually become primes on contracts, because we're building a process that quite frankly, does things in a more 21st century way that allows things to be broken up. That doesn't force things to be put in these large swath of contracts. And that's just the thing that we will work with you both on as we go through the reform process.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this point, are there any additional questions or concerns for Mr. Borman and Rex and Parks? The only other thing that, Mr. Borman, if when you work with MWBOO office, and you actually develop that plan regarding Riverside Park on MBE, WBE attainment, if you could reach out to my office and we kind of go over what the plan is, really interested in seeing how we catch up.
Yes, sir. Will do.
At this point, if there are any additional questions or concerns for Ms. Borman, Ms. Borman, again, thank you for your time jumping on with us. Are there any additional questions or concerns for Rex and Parks? Hearing and seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to proceed.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is approved. On to the next item.
Actually, Mr. President, that is it. The remaining items have all
Premier
been
staff, it's been
deferred.
moved on. All right, and then Celebrate contract.
Was moved to
Put back,
routine.
right?
That was moved to routine.
Gotcha.
We've already approved it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Comptroller. You always hold me steady. Okay, so as there is no new business before the board, we will recess until bid opening at 12 noon. The Board of Estimates will reconvene on April the 7th, 2021. Thank everyone for tuning in. Baltimore, please continue to stay safe. We see the numbers. It's important for us to wash our hands, continue to wear our masks, continue to stay distant from one another. We will continue to fight this thing called COVID-19 pandemic. Baltimore, we love you.
Thank you.